This video is about crossing over into a parallel universe that is set during the 1800s during the Civil War time period. I have been feeding the wildlife in the woods behind my home since January 2010. I have experienced many otherworldly and paranormal occurrences while feeding the wildlife there. One of the most, if not the most, memorable experiences that I have had with the parallel universe phenomenon happened on a hot summer day a few years ago. I set the bag that I carried the bird food in on a large flattened rock like I usually do, and I walked over to where the wild mallard ducks were to feed them. I glanced over to where I had left the bag that I carry their food in, and I was shocked to see a camera on a tripod facing the rock and the bag of food. What was surprising to me was that the camera was not a camera from our time period at all. It looked like it was from the 1800s. The first thought that came to my mind was, what in the world is that camera doing there? Is someone spying on me? Then I wondered why an old-fashioned camera was there instead of a modern-day camera. I thought that maybe someone was in the small woods behind my home doing a Civil War reenactment, since history buffs sometimes do these in Michigan, especially during the summer months, but I did not see any people around. Usually they do reenactments at festivals around the state, so I thought it was strange. Then I suddenly saw two men dressed in Civil War uniforms across the little river that runs through the woods standing on the opposite shore that the ducks and I were on. They were there for only a few seconds, and then they vanished. I saw Civil War soldiers on two other occasions while I was in the woods behind my home feeding the ducks and other wildlife. On each occasion, the men appeared and then disappeared a few seconds later. What I thought was especially odd was that the men were dressed in Confederate uniforms. I live in the state of Michigan, and Michigan was a Union state during the Civil War. I highly doubted that anyone in Michigan would be running around in Confederate uniforms. Besides, the soldiers vanished after only a few seconds, so at that point I was starting to question whether they were even from our time period at all. As you can imagine, all sorts of thoughts were running through my mind, and then I became a little scared, because I was wondering what in the world I would say to the soldiers if they were ever able to interact with me and ask me where I was from, especially if they were truly Civil War soldiers from a past timeline and not Civil War reenactors. I could not tell them that I was from Michigan since it was a Union state during the Civil War, and that would more than likely lead to my certain death. I highly doubted that they would believe that I was from the 21st century, when to them they were fighting the Civil War in the 1860s. Then I heard one of them say, "She must be from another country." I believe that my hearing this meant that they did in fact see me, but assumed that I was from another country, because I was wearing baggy sweatpants and a tank top since it was a hot summer day, and my hair was pulled up in a short ponytail, and I have bangs, which is not the way in which women dressed nor wore their hair back in the 1860s. I saw those Civil War soldiers in the woods behind my home on 3 separate occasions. However, my experience with that particular timeline did not end with my only seeing them. Shortly after that, I was driving my car on a service drive near my home near some shops. I was driving no more than 25 or 30 miles per hour, but I could feel myself start to cross over into the Civil War parallel universe again as I was driving my car. What was really strange was that although I was driving my car and I had my hands on the steering wheel, I could also feel myself transition to the Civil War universe in which the character that I would have played there, if I would have fully crossed over into that parallel reality, was sitting on a covered wagon, driving a team of horses with reins in her hands. I could actually feel myself holding the reins in my hands as I was shifting away from driving my car to driving the team of horses. For a few brief seconds, I was straddling the two worlds, our present-day timeline and the Civil War timeline, and I felt scared because the speed at which my car was going down the road was apparently also being perceived by the woman or character from the Civil War era that I was transitioning to, and she was scared of the speed at which my car was traveling. But yet I could feel myself, the person that I am in our current time period, not being scared and trying to tell myself and her to not be scared. I also did not want to fully cross over into the Civil War parallel reality, as I did not want to leave my life in our present-day time period behind. Therefore, I did not fully cross over onto the Civil War timeline. I wanted clarity regarding what had happened on those occasions on which I was seemingly crossing over into a Civil War parallel reality, and then, shortly after having these real-life experiences while I was awake and going about my daily routine, I dreamt while sleeping that I had indeed begun to cross over into a parallel universe set during the Civil War era on those 4 occasions. But the Civil War parallel universe, however, was not a glimpse into the past on our own timeline. In other words, I did not time travel back to the past on our current timeline. I was crossing over into a parallel universe that was running parallel to ours during our present day, but it was simply set during the Civil War era. I was told in the dream that the souls that are incarnated on that particular Civil War timeline need to learn certain soul lessons or life lessons that they cannot learn during our present-day time period. Hence, they were incarnated onto a timeline that was set during the 1860s. I was also told that it was not in my best interest to fully cross over into that parallel reality, and that I do not need to live during the Civil War time period for my own soul growth. Hence, I did not fully cross over into the Civil War era parallel reality, and I did not leave my present-day life on our current timeline behind to live on that Civil War timeline. I simply straddled the 2 timelines, our present-day timeline and the Civil War timeline. Although these experiences shocked me at first, since I had never experienced a parallel universe in another time period to such an extent, it at the same time did not surprise me, because ever since I began to experience the phenomenon of parallel universes, so much has happened to me almost on a daily basis that pretty much nothing surprises me anymore. If I make it through a day without something out of the ordinary happening, that is an unusual day. I had never shared these particular experiences with others until recently, when I was a speaker at the International Mandela Effects Conference, which was held in Nashville, Tennessee in November 2024. However, I now want to share these experiences with others in hopes of bringing this knowledge to humanity so that we can all open our minds and learn about the nature of reality, especially during these monumental times in which it has been said that humanity is in the process of ascending to a higher state of consciousness.